James wanted England to be a peaceful and balanced society and saw a new translation of the Bible as a key ingredient of that. But there was already a string of English Bibles, so why wouldn't any of them be good enough for the king? Cambridge University Library is home to some of the oldest editions of the English Bible, Bibles that predate the King James Version, including the grandfather of all English Bibles by the great Protestant martyr William Tyndale. He was a genius. We owe many of the all-time great phrases in English to his translation. Eat, drink and be merry, rise and shine, salt of the earth, bald as a coot.
What it says here is...
But as Laurianne Ferrell, a specialist on the translations, explained, James had problems with the seditious tone of many of Tyndale's words.
This is about... Well, we can look here. I think theologically we can see a swipe at the church, a rather large swipe, and very important swipe at the church, in Matthew 16:18, where Jesus is said to have said, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." That is a very famous line, always used to actually uphold the power of the papacy. Here, Tyndale has translated this, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my congregation.
Which sounds almost absurd. You can't really build a congregation, can you? I mean, that is so propagandist.
What it could be saying simply is, the Pope, he does not make the church, nor do the priests. It's the congregation.
But you can assume that James, reading that, would throw up his hands.
Well, he famously said, no bishop, no king. I think he likes, I mean, all kings like the structure of the institutional church. And then if you read through it...
Any assault on church structure, and as head of that church, on the king's authority, was clearly unacceptable. There was an alternative Bible James could have considered. Now here, we have the 1560s Geneva Bible. It had been translated by English Protestant refugees in Geneva, one of the centres of the Reformation.
Look how worn out it is. I mean, look at it's already...
But the problem was that this Bible contained equally treasonable annotations.
What he probably doesn't like is the characterization, especially in the Old Testament, of kings as tyrants. For example, the story of Herod. One of the notes to this is Matthew 2:20 says, God hath infinite means to preserve them from the rage of tyrants. Not the rage of Herod, the rage of tyrants.
And James would have felt that he was lumped together in that, would he?
There's a king club, I think, or there's a way of thinking about yourself as a king that transcends being lumped with bad kings.
James wasn't the first monarch to balk at this sort of language. 35 years earlier, Elizabeth I ordered a translation designed to buttress the crown. This is the Elizabethan Bishop's Bible. My God.
It weighs as much as a bishop. It's the size of an Elizabethan bishop.
Tell me about that.
Well, to begin with, it weighs more than I do. And look what we have here. A spectacularly young Elizabeth.
This is state proclamation and the Word of God completely fused. What's wrong with the Bishop's Bible?
Well, it's just bad. Even churches didn't purchase it. There's a lot of bad translating. There's some real clunkers in here. Here's an example. It's Ecclesiastes 11:1. Why don't you read it? This is actually a very famous biblical verse, but it sounds completely incomprehensible in this version.
Lay thy bread upon wet faces, and so shalt thou find it after many days. I think it does try to translate, cast thy bread upon the waters, which is meant to mean give to the poor, because it will return to you in some good form later.
Right, unfortunately on their face. It seems to me that there's an issue here with the translation of the notion of surfaces, but lay thy bread upon wet faces does not sing. It does, and it's not memorable.
It is for the wrong reason. The Bishop's Bible had one thing going for it. Its politics were closest to James's. Trouble is, no one was reading it. James realized there was no choice but to order a new translation, one that people would read, that underlined his divine authority, but did not alienate the people who were his subjects. But how to reconcile these conflicting needs? The library also houses a document which reveals how James went about it. It's a stringent set of rules drawn up for the new translation.
The commission for the New Bible was the only concession given to the Puritans at Hampton Court. They lost on every other issue. And what I see in the rules is attempts to control the particular points that were close to the hearts of Puritans. There are several that are relevant to this. The first of the rules is that the ordinary Bible read in churches, commonly called the Bishop's Bible, is to be followed, and as little altered as the truth of the original will permit. No marginal notes at all to be affixed, but only for the explanation of Hebrew or Greek words. And the old ecclesiastical words to be kept. And the examples that are given are church instead of congregation. Another that is used is baptize instead of wash. So there's a conscious choice there.
And what is that choice, though? What does it represent?
Well, the Greek baptizo simply means to plunge something into water. So wash would be one way of rendering that, whereas baptize has a kind of liturgical association, and the Puritans didn't like that. And the same is true, the word behind church, ecclesia, it simply means a gathering of like-minded people. So they wanted that translated congregation because the word church was so tied up with the existing establishment with bishops and all that they wanted nothing to do with it.
So Bishop's Bible, no Puritan words, no Puritan marginal notes. Do you think the Puritans were sold a dummy here?
In a sense they were, in that they were brought in believing that this was their great chance. And in the end, well, not in the end, in the beginning, the rules effectively strangled their ambitions.
These early decisions about translating individual words would dictate the future beliefs of the Church of England. It would remain ceremonial, sacramental, hierarchical, very different from the Puritan model. So why did the Puritans not simply walk away? Well, don't forget, the new translation was still their idea. And they did leave their mark, as we shall see. But what's fascinating is the idea of a set of rules for what is meant to be, after all, God's own words. There's no hint in these rules of any divine inspiration or any thought of God coming down and somehow telling the translators what to do, nor even any suggestion of prayerfulness, of people needing to be in the right frame of mind. These are the exact instructions of royal officials to be followed to the letter.